Audiobooks and beyond.
The Shifting Woods. Narrated by Matthew Oliver. The rain fell in a soft, steady rhythm, a gentle tapping on the ancient forest canopy that was a stark contrast to the frantic beat of Marcus Thorne's heart. He was a man defined by stillness, a veteran of countless operations where silence and patience were the only currency. But tonight, in these hushed woods, stillness felt like a lie. He was deep in the Cascade Range, miles from any road, on a mission given to him by a government agency so secretive he still wasn't sure if it actually existed. His objective: confirm and contain a rumored incursion, an atmospheric entry by non-terrestrial entities. His gear was state-of-the-art, a whisper-quiet suit of combat fatigues and a rifle that fired rounds of condensed plasma. Yet, his most valuable tool was his intuition, a gut feeling honed by years of surviving the unsurvivable. That intuition was screaming at him now. It wasn't the sound of the rain, the snap of a twig, or the rustle of leaves that bothered him. It was the absence of sound. There were no birds, no insects, no squirrels scrambling. The forest was dead quiet, holding its breath. He reached the coordinates marked on his encrypted device, a small clearing where the trees were twisted into impossible shapes. Their branches curled like gnarled fingers against the gray sky. In the center, there was a patch of ground, completely devoid of life. No grass, no moss, just a dark, scarred earth that looked like a wound. This was the entry point. A thin, glassy film shimmered in the air a few feet above the ground, almost invisible. It pulsed with a faint, sickly green light, and the air around it hummed with an unsettling low frequency. Marcus adjusted his night vision goggles, the world turning into shades of green and black, and watched. He saw no ship, no wreckage, just the subtle distortion of the air. And then, he saw the first one. It wasn't large, about the size of a deer, but it moved like a liquid shadow. It had no discernible limbs, no head, just a shifting mass that seemed to absorb the light around it. It oozed from beneath the ground, flowing over the dark earth, leaving behind a trail of nothing. The ground was still scarred, but the trail left by the creature was a complete lack of presence, as if a memory had been wiped from the forest floor. Marcus raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. He'd been trained for this, but the training was for enemies that had form, that followed the laws of physics. This thing was a violation of everything he knew. Suddenly, a different sound cut through the silence. It was a faint cry, a man's voice, raw with pain and rage. It didn't come from the clearing, but from deeper in the woods. Marcus froze, pulling his finger back from the trigger. The voice was distant, but it was unmistakably human. The whispers of the old military briefing room came back to him, the strange, disjointed reports of previous incursions. The reports had been vague and heavily redacted, but one line had stuck with him: unexplained sightings of human-like combatants engaged in futile struggle. It was a phrase that had been dismissed as the ravings of a panicked soldier, but Marcus had a cold feeling that it was far from a hallucination. He decided to investigate. The mission was to contain, but he couldn't ignore a potential friendly in distress. He moved with the silent grace of a ghost, skirting the perimeter of the clearing, his eyes scanning the dense underbrush. He followed the sound, the cries of pain now replaced by the muted clang of metal against something hard and unyielding. As he drew closer, a strange distortion of the air grew more intense, not the glassy film from the clearing, but a different kind of shimmer, as if the air itself was rippling like water. He reached a small ravine and peered down. What he saw was a nightmare given form. 2 soldiers, dressed in old military uniforms, but not his. They were from a different era, perhaps the 1940s, and they were locked in a strange, silent struggle. One soldier had the other in a chokehold, his face twisted in a silent snarl of rage. The other's eyes were wide with terror, his hands clawing at the forearms of his attacker. They seemed to be in a loop of futile, pointless combat, a paradox of men fighting themselves, and nothing, all at once. Marcus's mind flashed back to the top-secret reports where he had read about the paradox in the woods, a name given to the strange phenomenon that plagued previous missions. He was seeing it with his own eyes. Then, a sudden, blinding flash of white light erupted from the spot where the 2 men struggled. The explosion was silent, but it felt like a physical blow, a sudden rush of pressure that knocked the air from his lungs. When his vision cleared, the soldiers were gone. There was no trace of them. Marcus stared at the empty space, his mind reeling. For a single, horrifying second, he thought the 2 men had looked just like him. It was a fleeting thought, a trick of the light and the shadows, but it sent a shiver of ice down his spine. The fear he had been holding at bay finally broke through, a cold knot of dread twisting in his stomach. The threat wasn't just the aliens, it was the place itself. It was the way the forest took men and twisted them into something else, something that existed in a state of eternal, maddening combat. He had to get out. This wasn't a mission he could complete, not with a rifle, not with a plan. He turned to retreat, but the woods had changed. The trees were no longer the silent observers they had been. They were closer now, their branches reaching out like bony arms. The familiar trail he had followed was gone, replaced by a dense, tangled undergrowth that seemed to have sprung up out of nowhere. The world was shrinking, and he was at the center of it, a fly caught in a web. He took a deep, shuddering breath and forced himself back to the mission objective. He had to contain the threat. He had to face it head on. As he pushed his way through a thick patch of ferns, another of the liquid shadow creatures appeared, a swirling mass of blackness that absorbed the moonlight. This one was different, larger than the first, and it solidified as it moved, taking on a vaguely humanoid form, a grotesque mockery of a man with no features, just a gaping, dark space where its face should have been. Marcus raised his rifle and fired. The plasma round shot through the air with a soft hiss and struck the creature's chest. There was a sound like shattering glass as the creature's form briefly fractured, but it reformed almost instantly, the bits of black vapor flowing back into the hole. The creature advanced, its movements fluid and impossible. It wasn't attacking with claws or brute force. Instead, it was doing something far more terrifying. A sense of profound dread, of a cold and utter loneliness, began to flood Marcus's mind. It felt like every mistake he had ever made, every loss he had ever suffered, was being amplified and thrown back at him. The creature was a physical embodiment of despair. He had to get out. The creature's attack was not physical. It was a mental assault. He realized a rifle was useless. He needed a different tool, one designed for containment, not destruction. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small, metallic cylinder. This was a prototype, a non-lethal device designed to project a localized temporal field, essentially a bubble where time was frozen. The agency had told him it was for advanced containment scenarios. He raised the device and aimed it at the creature's center mass. With a soft hum, A shimmering sphere of blue light erupted from the cylinder and enveloped the liquid shadow. The creature's form froze mid-stride, its swirling mass held in stasis. The profound sense of despair that had been flooding Marcus's mind abruptly cut off, replaced by a chilling silence. He had done it. He had captured the anomaly. The creature was still, a grotesque statue of darkness, suspended in the blue light. But the terror didn't leave him. He looked at the device in his hand, then at the contained being. His mission was to contain, to bring it back for analysis. But the thought of carrying this thing, this physical manifestation of dread, out of the woods and back to civilization was a new, horrifying prospect. What if the field failed? What if its influence bled through the containment? He was alone in the dead quiet of the forest, holding a nightmare in his hands, with no one to trust but himself, and a cold voice in his mind, echoing a familiar face, asked a single question. What do you do now?